So we all know Donald J. Trump, 47th President of the United States of America, holds the spots for the two lowest approval ratings in the first 100 days, and he's responsible for activating the National Guard in Chicago, Memphis, D.C., and Portland. Now that a couple months have passed with the administration battling the courts, the big question is using the National Guard in this way justified or legal? No, no, not even close. It's so bad. When you look more into the nitty-gritty, you realize it's much worse than you could ever realize. To understand the reason why it's not justified, you need some background information on the National Guard. Oh, wait, won't you take a look over there? A link to a video that already explains the National Guard perfectly, and it has all right editing? Oh my god, what a lucky person you are. So do me a favor, and do yourself a favor, watch that, then come back. I'll be waiting. Okay, so before we talk about the nitty-gritty on why it's unlawful, we need to start at the beginning. During the 2024 campaign election trail, Donald Trump started talking about cracking down on the biggest problems to the United States of America, such as trans people, Haitians eating dogs, how every country rips us off, and crime. Once he was elected, the administration purged multiple high-ranking military and intelligence leadership, which I'm sure is totally normal and something that happens every single time a new administration comes in. Right? Anyway, this all culminated on June 7th when the National Guard was deployed repeatedly up to the now present day. Now that we got the backstory, we can talk about the legal background. The National Guard deployments are separated into two categories. Even though all these cities had deployment from the National Guard by the president, not all of them have the same reasoning nor the same activation types. In addition, all of these court cases challenging the deployment are using many different legal pathways, but all of them have one thing in common, debating whether the circumstances justify the use of the National Guard. Let's start with Memphis and D.C. Both were activated by Title 32. Both the justification for these deployments are crime, and the breakdown of law and order. To see the validity of these claims, let's start with Memphis. Is it true that Memphis has extraordinary amounts of crime? It's kind of true. Memphis crime overall is at an all-time low for 25 years. However, for violent crime, there have been points in those 25 years that have been lower than it is now, present day. In addition, Memphis as a city just straight up has the highest crime rate in the United States of America. Just like straight up. Now, on DC, the validity is just not true at all. Crime rate has actually been lower all around, so low that the Attorney Office released an article stating violent crime has been at its lowest for 30 years. In addition, homicides are at its lowest, so that means the deployments in Memphis were justified and in DC it wasn't, right? Well, no, not exactly. Let's follow the logic here. Say hypothetically DC and Memphis were definitely in need for extra security, since crime is so rampant there. Let's just take this as fact. Let's set aside the fact that regular law enforcement isn't the National Guard's role in the first place, since they're supposed to be short-term supplemental law enforcement and not full-time. But whatever. What is the plan here? Like, seriously, just let them do law enforcement forever and keep them activated? Make them stay outside women's bathrooms so they can beat any trans women that try and enter? Like, if crime is so bad that they absolutely need the extra law enforcement, then you can never ever pull them out. Because once they leave, crime will go back up. It's just a half-baked solution, since, surprise, surprise, tackling crime is kind of complicated. Public safety is a top-down system with many different groups and institutions that work together to keep the public safe. It is also a bottom-up system that has police officers and cameras, and to fix that you need to reinforce and put more money into those areas. Oh wait, won't you look at that? Memphis was already doing this! This is why most of these deployments were immediately shot down in court, because the circumstances and the level weren't justified at all. In addition, just the logic is just... it's just stupid. Why would you ever do this? Okay, but whatever, I digress. Now let's look at the other National Guard deployments like Chicago, LA, and Portland. using Title 10. The cited reasons for deployment was to protect the ICE agents and help them facilitate their job. However, when we look at Chicago and Portland, the ICE quote-unquote interference was only public protests that were in front of an ICE detention facility. Were they taking up space? Absolutely, but they were demonstrating their First Amendment right to assembly. The story is exactly the same in Portland, people showing up but dressed in funny costumes and dancing, which, I don't know about you, doesn't seem that threatening, but again, Republicans also just hate fun. However, if you're tracking the news in June, the protests in LA did turn violent, and there were reports of protesters throwing rocks onto cars, there was rioting for the whole 9 yards. Seeing all of this, you would assume that this Title 10 was justified. And yeah, you would be right. If we just took the definition and rules at face value, but like always, what matters more are the circumstances and the level of the environment. To determine when it is justified to activate Title 10, let's look at last time Title 10 was ever activated, in 1992 during the LA riots. If you don't know, the riots started after a jury acquitted 4 police officers that were videotaped beating Rodney King, a black man. Over the course of a few days, more than 60 people died while another 2,000 were injured. It got so bad that once the rioting moved to Koreatown, the Korean people that lived there at the time had to arm themselves to prevent rioters and looters from just hurting their businesses, because the police couldn't get through the protesters to prevent the destruction. The mayor at the time, Tom Bradley, and the governor, Pete Wilson, requested the National Guard to be activated from George Bush. In addition to 3,500 Marines were deployed. Once it was all said and done, more than 3,767 buildings were destroyed or damaged, and 4,000 fires started, leading to damages that amounted to $1 billion. Let's compare that to the LA riots of 25. 23 buildings were just damaged, 0 destroyed, no deaths, 32 casualties, 5 car fires, and some dumpster fires, roughly amounting to $1.1 million in damages. The mayor, governor, and police chief said Title 10 activation was not needed and the protests are under control, saying it was mostly peaceful. You still don't believe me that the destruction was mild? Here's a side-by-side map of the 2 riots. The curfew zone was the place where all this rioting took place. So we have an area a fraction of its size and damages that are 1,000 times less. Yeah, so safe to say, activating Title 10 was unnecessary. Frankly, activating all these titles were haphazard and unnecessary. It's almost like all the reasonings for these activations are BS and there's an underlying motivation to do this. Oh, wait, there is. It's to harass Democrat strongholds. This is extremely evident if you just watched Donald Trump's campaign. He kept talking about the enemy within during his campaign and in his presidency. By the way, the enemy he's referring to is the Democratic Party. In addition, remember how I told you he fired multiple military higher-ups and military lawyers? The reason he did that is because these leaders would have told him and Pete Hegseth that this is unconstitutional and frankly crazy. But here's the real kicker though. The real kicker here is this isn't just a Trump and his cabinet promoting this. It's the whole Republican Party, aka the MAGA Party. Remember how the National Guard was sent into D.C.? Well, since Title 32 requires governors to provide permission to use their National Guard, can you guess which governors gave Donald Trump the permission to deploy their National Guard to D.C.? You're right! Republicans from Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, and West Virginia. In addition, multiple congressional senators were just hype-manning the administration during these deployments. You know it's bad when these are the same Republicans that fussed when these 6 Democrats told the military to refuse unlawful orders. So, just remember, MAGA Republicans have 0 principles and 0 values. So in the end, all of these National Guard deployments have been losing in the courts, citing the Home Rule Act, the Tennessee Constitution, and other various ways, which is a good thing, but if you're plugged in, you would know the administration just figured out another way to harass Democrat cities, which is ICE. So what can we do? Well, right now, Democrats are shutting down the government because that's all they can do because nobody voted for them, but that's a rant for another time. Just support your Democrat representatives, tell them to refuse to work with Republicans in any way possible until they stop using ICE like this. In addition, vote for the midterms, special elections, and locals, because if we don't win any of these areas again, we are truly, truly doomed. Hey guys, I hope you liked the video. Please subscribe.